Hey everyone, today I have the extreme pleasure of being in Moscow, Idaho with Brian of Occam Defense. We have talked before on camera when we were at SHOT Show back in 2020. The issue was we didn't have a complete 1775 rifle to look at. We had one that was really well put together, I believe it was by Lee Armory with the Merc handguard, so we were able to talk a little bit about that, but I just figured being here in the belly of the beast, so to speak, we can actually talk about what is going on with these rifles and what makes them so special. And before we get into that, I just want to talk about how I became familiar with what Occam Defense is doing and kind of the real magic that I think is taking place here. And I had heard through, like James Yeager's YouTube videos that he had done with you when you first had your rear sight base. Like that was just a little kind of taste. Yeah, this guy here, the rear sight tower. For those of you not familiar, it's something that basically replaces your entire rear sight base tower and gives you a piece of pick rail there, and it's a base as bomb-proof of a red dot attachment as you could possibly build because it's integral to the gun at that point. And it was just this really neat little idea that was like, okay, he's taking a different approach to it, and I'm anxious to see where he goes. And now here we are, how many years later? And we've got complete guns, and he walked me through kind of the manufacturing process and the amount of innovation that you've done so far, and I'm sure we'll continue to do, and the extreme attention to detail, I think, is what gets me so excited about these guns, because it's truly on a different level than most people are familiar with when it comes to building AKs. So real briefly, what got you into AKs in the first place?
So I was in California behind enemy lines trying to make a rifle that I could defend my family with. I was new to black guns. I'd been shooting, 22s and stuff all my life. But, my dad was a Vietnam vet, and he had done enough war where he didn't really want to, he wasn't anti-gun, but he didn't want to deal with, with tactical type stuff. He was a peaceful guy by that point. And, but I was all down with the war. So I always wanted as a kid to design my own guns. I would make, little spear guns and stuff with what materials I could find. But kind of left all that, kind of got hippied out. I'm still mostly a hippie, but I really love, I love people leaving each other alone. I'm a pacifist. And, I don't mean you can do whatever you want to me, but don't start shit, won't be shit is kind of where I'm at with that. And was in California and had children, and running away is always a fantastic option. Running away works all the time. If you have little kids in your arms and there's a methed out crazy person threatening to do you harm, running away doesn't work anymore. And hand to hand doesn't work in that situation. And knife fighting doesn't work. I went through some fairly ridiculous trainings where I had asked, like, hey, is this a legitimate way to train for a kid? And they'd be like, yeah. We'd get into the training, and I'd be like, okay, we've got a knife out, my kid's in my arms, what do we do with the kid? And they literally said to me, put your kid 30 feet behind you and continue the knife fight. And I said, you are not a serious person. And so I realized that that's what guns are for. I kind of got to reinvent the wheel all on my own. And realized that, you need a gun. And I was in California, and they said, you can't have the guns. So I started looking at all the legal loopholes. And at that time, if you built yourself an 80%er, which was not well known at that time, you could get around damn near all the laws. And if you made it featureless, which is where you get rid of the ability to have a thumb grip, so there's a fin that blocks this area off so that you have to clamshell it like this, that lets you use a detachable magazine without a bullet button, or used to. And it still does in California, actually. We make Cali models now. So went out, set about to build my own gun, started with an AR-10, but I wanted it to be a short barrel because a 20-inch barrel was going to be nonsense for my weird, untrained, totally naive idea. So I wanted a 16-inch AR-10, and I set about to build it. And then I started researching, hey, and this is 2014, 2015, nobody really had one out yet that worked. Like now you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a 308. That's awesome, like from guys like Seekins or... I've heard of a bunch of great companies making good 308s now. But at that time, a reliable 308 was not a thing. And I started re-examining my decision. I'm like, okay, I wanted 30 cal for good knockdown. because for self-defense, putting 5.56 rounds into somebody, like that's not to me as good as one 30 cal round, well placed. And I know that 5.56 properly placed can get the job done. It's just that I happen to sit on the 30 cal side of that conversation. So I'm like, okay, I wanted a short barrel 30 cal that's highly reliable. Oh no, because I had looked at the AK and the thing was so friggin' ugly. I'm like, that's the weapon of the enemy, and it's uglier in sin. I can't even bear to look at the thing. I want my sleek Call of Duty AR style, so I can be, a death dealer and but I'm like, oh man, 30 cal short barrel, highly reliable. I just reinvented the AK.
Right.
So I got rid of the AR-10 kit and started researching how to build AKs. As a game, I built all my own tooling, which is a very long way to do that process. AK Builder is worth the money every day of the week. Made a gun that was horrific, and then realized that I needed to learn from somebody that knew what they were doing. Went to one of Jim Fuller's build classes at RD, and he was super giving to me. He let me actually video. He told me that it would be very bad if I shared the video, but I could video it for my own personal use.
Sure.
And so that's a very, he's been very good to me. And since then as well, with helping me out when I'm confused on something.
Sure.
But took a build class with him, and that was amazing. And then the rest is kind of history. I ruined a lot of guns, and it was only a couple of years ago that it was 3 or 4 years of building before I built myself a rifle that I would trust my life to. So yeah, that's been the slow development, but also that California gun law of not being able to have a thumb grip. I was trained in a tactical response. And when you're a student there, you do a lot of left-handed, one-handed shooting from behind a barricade. And if you try to do this, my hand's even shaking a little bit just doing it. Left-handed on my dominant side, not a big deal. Non-dominant, when it's like 5 minutes and I'm still like this, horrible.
Sure.
So I was using other equipment at the time that had the sight forward, and what I realized is there's all this weight on the front end of the gun. And Jim had correctly identified that problem way far back and did he kind of is the father of the combo gas block. Everybody knows what the RD gun looks like, right? And that was a good solution. I wanted to go further than that. And so what I realized is that by if I could move the sight back to here and get rid of some extra stuff, we all know that the longer we make a lever, the worse it is. And so we want to make those levers short and pull all the mass as far back as we can on the gun. That led to that RST because I realized I could cut out the weight of an Ultimac, but also move the sight back farther and get everything that I wanted.
And if I can cut in, yeah. I think that's one of the things that is making Occam Defense special is a lot of the AK world is, I don't know if classically trained is the phrase that I'm looking for, but there's a lot of tradition in the building of AKs. And by coming into it late with a very technical background in high precision machining and everything else, you were able to look at this thing that everyone had been doing for literally decades and say, well, hey, why can't we do it like this? Why can't we do it like this? Because everyone was so ingrained in, well, this is the way it's done. You were able to come into it with fresh eyes and reevaluate some of those things. And in a very short period of time, do a lot of things to rethink how it's done in, I think, a very beneficial way. With that rear sight base tower, and then as we'll get into with the Mark handguard, what you're even able to do there with free floating and moving that cantilever further back. So I think that's one of the things that has made what you've brought to the table a little bit more unique and I think valuable for the industry as a whole. Yeah, that's actually been kind of a theme throughout my career is cross application of technology to new industries. People call it a technology transfer. So my original studies in college and grad school were in applying particle physics detectors that were used. There's a NASA telescope called Fermi, Fermi. He was a very famous, I think he was on Manhattan Project, but he did a whole lot more than that for physics. Enrico Fermi is an Italian Jew who fled Hitler, and we got him. Like a whole bunch of, we got such an advantage
by grabbing all of that brain power that fled Hitler. And at any rate, worked on that telescope, and we applied that technology to cancer therapy. It turns out that proton radiation is really good for cancer treatment. So that was my first introduction from taking, okay, let's take this thing in particle physics, move it over to medicine, do something really cool. And that's kind of been a theme for me, is that I'm kind of a jack of all trades, master of none, where I've played in a whole bunch of different ponds. And like we were talking about, how I was a violin maker's apprentice and was able to pull some of those construction methods. There's a lot of crossover between violins and AKs. So I've tried to steal, in the tradition of Picasso, he said, good artists borrow, great artists steal. And I try to steal as much as I can. Like, people are often comment on the genius of the heat shield, and, I have to deflate them somewhat, in that all we did was take muffler technology from the bottom of a car. That's all it is. Now, I did the science behind why it works so well. It applies half of the benefit that you get from the overall Merc. Like, half of the benefit is that we grab at the coolest part on the barrel way at the rear, so that the hottest part of the barrel is up in here. And so the first thing was to get the heat, grab it where it's coolest. But the second thing is, what the heat shield does is it radiates the heat back onto the barrel, which has a downside. If you do too good a job with that, you melt the barrel. So we do this trade-off between barrel lifetime and user comfort, and try and split the difference there. But yeah, technology transfers, I think, are a big deal, and something we've tried to bring to the table.
Cool. Yeah. So with that being said, with some of the innovation that you've done, let's talk about the 1775 rifle itself and how all of those things have kind of formed their way into a complete gun. First of all, I would hope that anyone watching any of my videos would be familiar with the significance of the number 1775. But real quick, why that name?
Yeah, so I got the name from a book that I highly recommend called 1491. That's about everything up to the point pre-Columbian America. So before Columbus arrived to about 100, 200 years after he showed up. And that got me thinking about the interesting causal relationships in time, where we talk about the climax of an event like 1776, but we never talk about 1775.
Right.
419, Lexington and Concord, British came to do gun control and take the colonists' guns. And the colonists said, fuck no. And, shots fired and all that. They technically lost the battle. They had to retreat, but in guerrilla warfare, that's a win. And so they lost the battle, won the war. And so 1775 is an homage to that. And not necessarily that I'm excited about a revolution. I'm excited about when people's minds as a group crystallize around self-governance, self-determination, self-ownership. And to me, 1775 is the interesting year. And that, like I said, I'm not calling for 1776. I am calling and hoping for people to own themselves and to be well educated and self-actualized and all that. So yeah.
Absolutely. And 1776 gets all of the attention because of the signing of the Declaration of Independence and everything. But like you said, understanding what got us to that point, I think, is almost more valuable, because you're able to better recognize, when you understand what got us to that point, it helps you understand what the founding fathers set up after the fact, and to hopefully prevent anything like that from happening again. And I think gives you a better appreciation for it, which is, I think, partly why one of the things you include with every rifle is a copy of the Constitution.
Yeah,
is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
So understanding those things is super important. But with that kind of preface out of the way, let's work from the back to front on the 1775 rifle. So what do we have here at the back?
So we've got our a billet on this gun. It's a fixed stock, which some people love a fixed stock. Our folder we prefer. However, for folks in California or folks that don't want to fold, this is a great solution. It's super light. It's got 3 sling QD points. This QD here came from training with Sonny Pazikas, and he showed me the way the Russians run an AK is at the first sign of a threat, safety comes off, sling comes off. And so the sling is hanging down. If you've got a 2-point, you're here. And if you're grabbing right on the receiver, right behind the grip, the problem is that the way that Russians do switch grip shooting and it's hard to do this slow, so it's going to look hacky. They'll come across and sister their two hands here and then pass over. And so it looks kind of like that when you're actually, and some foot movement helps a lot there. But if your sling is attached right behind the grip, you're going to grab it every time when you go to switch hands. And that's also true if you do, you know, what is it? This method. I'm going to do this the other way now. If you're like this and you come over and switch hands and you bring your hand in, same thing. You're going to tend to grab that 2-point sling. So Sonny and I were talking about the difficulties of that. I was like, man, and this was on the triangle side folders. If I just put a rod through there and weld it on top and bottom, I can attach the sling back here and life's groovy. And so when I actually started making our own stocks, and that was just born out of COVID, I couldn't get Magpul. You couldn't get a Magpul AK stock, which is what we were using, because they're just a solid, you know, middle of the road. Yep. Everybody kind of likes them. They're nothing special, but they don't break. They're cool. So anyway, we switched over and started making a pick rear trunnion standard. So there's a rail of 1913 pick right here where you can attach any of the SIG stocks you like, or a brace if it's a pistol, or our stocks. And so there's a really nice ecosystem now. A lot of people are doing that. So yeah, pretty much, unless it's a custom gun and somebody specifically requests the rear tang, it's going to be pick. And I guess the reason for that, if you're not super familiar with AKs, is standard tang stocks are generally a nightmare to get to fit. You know, there's a lot of variances in dimensions, and the screws are always coming out. You know, it's not easy. And to install, the Magpul stocks are great, but if you don't install them perfectly with the right thread locker in the right places, they wobble loose all the time.
Yeah. And that's why they have that like wedge lock, is because there's so much variance. They have to make it end user customizable to get it to fit.
And that was a big problem for us on a production level when we were installing lots of different kinds. It was an arts and crafts project every time. Yeah. What I wanted to do was a stock, or a stock adapter that anybody could swap out in 2 minutes. And so on all these stocks, the SIG ones and ours, it's 1 or 2 screws and 2 minutes of your time to swap in a new stock or to remove it, you know, if you want to pack it down in a smaller bag. So that's in the rear. Receivers, we use both Morrissey and Childers receivers. They are both good. They both have their strengths and weaknesses. For instance, we were talking earlier, the Childers, you generally have to fit a little bit more up here at the front trunnion to get a really nice intimate contact to the sheet metal with the trunnion. With Morrissey's, we have to square them up front and rear and do some other stuff. So there's a little bit of tuning no matter what. We like both companies quite a bit. They're good people. Dust covers we have made ourselves. Recoil springs from Poland. ALG trigger group in here, either a Krebs or a standard safety. WBP bolt carriers, bolts, and front trunnions. I'd sent out a warning forever ago now that I may have to start switching to surplus. So far, I haven't had to actually do that. Occasionally, we'll swap in high-quality surplus bolt carriers, but for bolts and front trunnions, they've always been new manufacture. Sometimes they've been new old stock, but they've always been virgin. Let's see, moving forward, we make our own gas block, which is integral to the Merc. Gas tube. This clamp we make in-house. That's part of the Merc. The gas block is WBP. We've actually got our own coming out shortly here. The barrel is made in the U.S. to our specifications by one of 2 companies. We don't share that data, but it's a high quality. It's a 4140 or 4340 nitride, and people are always asking, why don't you use cold hammer forged chrome lined? And the reason is accuracy. The dimensional tolerancing of chrome lined barrels is not equal to that of a nitride barrel. If somebody was making a machine gun, I'd say chrome lined hammer forged all day long. These aren't machine guns. And so for most of my folks, they care a lot about accuracy. And to me, 4 MOA is totally adequate for a fighting gun, an assaulter's rifle. But we try to stick to 2 MOA because we can. And so that's the spec on that barrel. It's 1 and 8.5 or 9.5. I can't remember at the moment, but standard This is a custom muzzle device that we do. We have threaded ones coming out very soon. This is an adaptation of the expired Smith Industries Vortex patent that works extraordinarily well. We've also got a key mount interface that we do through dead air. Every gun gets checked for suppressor alignment before it goes out the door. We have a photo of every single gun we've made. We know what the suppressor alignment is, and they're all good to go. It doesn't go out unless it's good to go. That said, grown-ups should have suppressor rods because sometimes cans are out on the can side. So it's good to trust but verify, but we do everything that we can, to guarantee that a customer will have a good experience with a suppressor. We tune our gas system so that it works pretty good for both. And anybody who's wondering, I'm actually in front of Ryan, so I'm not pointing the gun at Ryan right now. Let's see. That is, grip is a Tango down. We stipple all of them with kind of a fine waffle pattern that it'll grip you back, but it won't tear you up. Right. We can do more aggressive stippling if people want, but this is something that we find works for damn near everybody. Mm-hmm. It's got that fun storage compartment in the bottom. Lastly, these are our PH1 sights. They're not required. They are inspired, shall we say, by the CZ sights, using an Arms 31 and a Holosun 403 or an Aimpoint T1 or T2. You get about a 45-50% co-witness. There are 4 apertures that I don't know if the camera's going to be able to see, but yeah, there we go. So there are 4 apertures here that let you pick the smallest diopter that is useful. One crazy thing that I recently learned is that if you have astigmatism, that is if your red dot is starting to turn into an hourglass or a diagonal slash or like random stuff that moves around, that's astigmatism. It's your eye getting old. If you look through an aperture, that acts as a lens that corrects astigmatism. It's like a pinhole camera. And I don't know if it's simply collimating the light and acting on a smaller area of the lens so you get less diffusion. Yeah. I don't know the exact physics. I just know that it works. And it's a really big deal if you're shooting for accuracy. Do yourself a favor, get a co-witnessing optic, neck it down to the narrowest diopter, and you'll shoot way better. It's crazy. Yep.
Huh. Yeah. So I worked in making lenses for glasses for a long time. Oh, no, and that does actually make sense when you describe it that way. We can draw out the diagrams later. Yeah. But that does actually make intuitive sense when you put it that way. But I wouldn't have thought of that. Now, really quickly, you were talking about nitrated barrels versus the chrome lined barrels. And one of the concerns in the AK world specifically is corrosive ammo. There's not a ton of the 7.62 corrosive ammo out there left in the market. But my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, nitrating is actually better for corrosion resistance than chrome lining because it's not going to flake off because it's an actual treatment of the metal, not just a coating that goes on top of the barrel.
Corrosive primers will pinhole stainless steel and chrome really fast if left unattended. So yeah, there's no benefit that I'm aware of to using chrome for corrosion. That doesn't mean I'm right, but I'm not aware of any benefit. And to me, there's 2 things that I care about with the accuracy. One is that the rifling is smooth and is uniform throughout the bullet's trajectory. The other is the chamber needs to be very precise in order to get good accuracy and, even more important, good cycling reliability. I've had the experience of having to throw a chamber reamer down a chrome lined barrel to cut out large amounts of chrome that had puddled. You can imagine like surface tension. If you have small details that are right angles, with the plating, you're going to tend to get surface tension, sort of blanking on the name, but like a meniscus is maybe the name. But no, that's not it.
Well, it's basically you're not dealing with right angles anymore. You're getting inconsistencies in the rifling, which is going to negatively affect the consistency of how the bullet's traveling down the barrel.
But more than that, in the chamber itself, where there's the hard corners that the cartridge is fitting in, it'll fill in those little armpits with like a fillet, basically. And if that fillet gets too big, you're going to have a major problem. And I have actually experienced that problem. I don't think it's widespread. I think it's possible to make a great chrome lined barrel. So I'm not saying that FN doesn't know what they're doing. Far from it.
Right.
But it's been my experience that nitride works great. In terms of corrosive ammo, it's all water soluble salts. So that's why you don't see hardly any, well, not any, but folks in Las Vegas don't have to worry too much about corrosive ammo. And the reason is there's no water anywhere.
Right.
And so you can have salt and metal with no water and you don't have any problems. If you add water to that, like you live in Tennessee or Florida or New England or anywhere where there's high humidity, especially with the salt content in the air, that's where corrosive ammo really starts to be an issue. That said, it's salt. So if you use water, you will remove the salt. So literally, if you had to, urinating down the barrel and gas port would get the job done. And ammonia, the reason people use Windex is that the ammonia acts as a surfactant, which just means it acts to help it wick the salt out quicker. So a bottle of Windex in your car is most of what you need to do. But literally just taking it into the shower and hosing off both down the gas tube and the barrel, you're going to be pretty good to go.
Sure. Now we've talked about kind of a lot of the surface level of the 1775, but again, where I really think the magic happens is in the fine detail work that gets you to this point. So, for example, we were, the Headspace discussion is a very big discussion in the AK world. And, I think it's a valuable discussion. I think sometimes it gets taken to a weird place, but I think it's a valuable discussion to have. One of the realities that you're typically going to get if you have a new production AK is that it'll wear itself in and your headspace is going to be shifting over the first couple hundred rounds probably before it really settles in and all those parts round themselves off and everything just kind of gets fitted to itself. But you have figured out a way to basically, from the get-go, as soon as it's a complete rifle, it's already worn in.
That's right. So we do a couple things there, and it came out of the very public failures of certain guns on the internet that it was obvious to me that if I messed that up, that it would be very bad. And so I set out to have an unimpeachable headspace on every one of our guns so that the guns would always perform within headspace. And so the way that the Russians' headspace guns is they'll push every barrel in to a certain point, and then they'll actually file the back edges of the bolt. And until it has enough room to screw shut. The locking lugs are actually on a screw thread that actually tightens up the further in you get. And I tried to do it that way, and I realized that it's always like little old women that are doing it. And those little old women have been doing it for 50 years, and they're really good at it. And what I realized was that was a very high skill operation that would take me years to teach somebody. Including myself. I was having mixed success doing it, and I've done a lot of detail work like that. So I set about figuring out a way to automate that and hit upon lapping compound. I'm not the first to do that. It's very common in the bolt gun space when people are blueprinting actions to really go through them and lap things in, or 1911s would be another example. So this is not new.
Sure.
Like I said, good artists borrow, great artists steal.
Right.
And so I'm just pulling over from other areas of gunsmithing where that occurs. We figured out how to automate it. And so we do follow the Russian prescription in terms of that we headspace the bolt to the gun. However, we're doing it in a slightly different way that I think results in a better product. Some people think that it's not a good idea. I think that the results of my guns speak for themselves.
Right.
So we get them. We have a certain prescription that we set them to, and when the gun is fired, it ends up right where we want it to be. And so there's some trade secrets there, but the basic idea is that basically we can guarantee that the gun is going to be at a headspace of 1.252 to 1.253 inches, and 1.252 is a go gauge. There's also a really, what people have been puzzling over is really a metrology question of how you measure headspace. And if you don't have a uniform way to measure headspace, there's no way to have a conversation about what things are. And so we worked with Robert Forbes, who's a great, I call him the Oracle. He knows everything about AKs, and he had turned me on to there's some translated East German armorers manuals by a guy I think named John Baum, B-A-U-M, that are amazing. And in there, they give you all the goodies. And so we just copied the headspace measurement procedure from the East German armorers manual, rewrote it with some pictures and modern equipment. But the punchline is that when you're pushing a go gauge home or a no-go or whatever, when you're making a headspace measurement, a lot of people have it in their hand how hard they should be pushing before they say, no, it won't close. But that's not a conversation that we can have. You need a number. And so the missing part of the conversation nationally was, how much force do you apply? And so we came up with a procedure for that. If you just Google for headspace measurement AK, it's on VSO Gun Channel's website, I think VSO Media. And we go through in a PDF with pictures and diagrams and all that, how to do it. But basically you use a force gauge, and maybe we can cut in some B-roll here.
Sure.
Use a force gauge like you're seeing here. We push up to 20 kilograms, which is about 44 pounds. That is the upper limit. And if we can't get a gauge to close with 20 kilograms or less of force, it's not good. And the window that we use for the measurement that we settle on is the gauge that the gun closes on, that's between 10 and 20 kilograms. And most people aren't aware of this, but you can get what are called progressive headspace sets, where you have and we'll roll some B-roll in right now so you guys can see it. It's a bunch of gauges that are each set 1/1000th of an inch apart. So in that way, we can actually measure. We know a whole lot more than is it closing on a go and not closing on a no-go. We know exactly, 2/1000th of an inch where the gun's at. And that might sound like a tiny number, but the difference between a go and a no-go is only 5/1000ths.
Oh.
So what we're doing is making sure that we've given you the greatest amount of life possible for the barrel that we're able to do.
Right.
Like the VSO gun that went through that 5,000 round test, it only grew 1/1000th of an inch and was still clover leafing after 5,000 rounds.
Right.
I feel really good about that. So it was at 1.252 when it left our shop, came back after 5,000 at 1.253. And a big part of accuracy is getting that headspace really reliable. And so you don't want to make it too tight because you'll impact cycling accuracy or cycling effectiveness, reliability. But you make it too loose and it's a hot dog in a hallway, that really changes how the gun runs because what happens is the bullet will enter the rifling at different angles. You're not controlling it well. So the idea is to control it all the way so that it's set up on that launch pad, ready to hit the grooves in the same way every time. And that's if there could be a bumper sticker about what I'm trying to do here, it's that our AKs don't have personality. That's the goal, that all of them are the same every time. And that's very different from some of my friends who are building one gun at a time from used parts kits that are gorgeous works of art. And these guys are brilliant in how they manage to remanufacture them. So it's no knock on the artisanal one at a time Kalash builder. It's just we're trying to do a different thing.
Sure. Yeah, and like you said earlier, the results speak for themselves with the one that VSO Gun Channel tested again after 5,000 rounds, still getting cloverleaf groups. Like you said, you just shooting regular Wolf polyformance steel cased ammo. You don't ship a gun that's over 2 MOA.
That's right.
I mean, and a lot of that comes down to that immense amount of work at every step of the manufacturing process to ensure that consistency. Because, when you look at match grade ammo, it's not like, they're using different bullets and everything than your standard FMJ, but the reason they're doing that is because they are getting as consistent of a bullet weight, the distribution of that weight in the projectile, the consistency of the load. They want as much consistency as possible, because that consistency and repeatability is what gets you that accuracy. That's one of the great things about the the multi-lug rotating bolt on the ARs, you get a very consistent
Yep.
lockup from
Yep.
time to time.
Yep.
You don't have that on an AK, so being able to, again, control that precision at every step of the process is what gets you to a similar end result.
That's right. Yep. And again, I think I would trust my life to a 4 MOA gun all day long.
Yeah.
The reason that I don't ship anything over 2 MOA is that, we haven't had a gun yet that won't do it. So why not do twice as well? It doesn't cost me any extra for labor. And it also just, to me, we ship a test target out with every gun. The reason I do that is not that the gun needs to be that accurate. It's that it's a pictorial representation of the consistency in our manufacturing process. And when I shoot a test target like that and it's grouping under an inch at 50 yards, I know that every step of the chain has gone right. There's this great line from the beginning of this famous Russian novel, Anna Karenina, that happy families are all alike. Unhappy families are miserable in their own special way. And it's a wonderful commentary about how, in order to have a happy family, you got to be hitting all the things. You got to be able to clothe the kids, pay for a roof over their head, have a decent conversation with your wife and not, bark at her. Nobody can have alcoholism. There's all these challenges. And if you have one thing out of whack, mental illness or anything like that, you've got a real problem in your family harmony. But if you hit all the things, it's going to be chill. And that's the genius of that happy families are all alike thing.
Yeah.
And it's the same with a gun. And that end result of an accurate target combined with good cycling, which is another thing that we test before the gun even. While the gun's still unpainted, we check for reliability and ejection where we want it and all that. And so when you combine good cycling reliability and good accuracy, I know I've done my job. And then we check cosmetics after that. But those are the three things. And it's just a great, easy button to hit. It's a lot of work. Yeah. But I can sleep well at night knowing that every gun that's gone out of here, I would trust my life to.
Right. And I think too, we can talk about the accuracy and consistency until we're blue in the face, but it's really when you actually get a chance to take one of these out and shoot it that you really start to appreciate that we're not just talking about reliability, but you're talking about getting that consistency and ejection and everything else, getting everything gassed properly. Most people who've run an AK have probably not run a tuned AK. It's
That's
just
right.
like a standard off-the-shelf kit build that some company maybe put together well or maybe didn't put together so well. And so I would say 90% of AKs out there are grossly overgassed. And when you actually get a chance to shoot something that has been actually tuned from start to finish with that consistency and attention to detail, it's a totally different shooting experience.
Yeah, it is. And overgassed is a relative term. People are always asking me, is your gun the best AK on the market? And best is a hugely subjective word. And I don't fault people for asking it because all you do the same thing. But to me, I was discussing with Ryan earlier, the best car on the planet in my book is the Toyota Corolla. Now, precisely 0 people are excited about the driving experience of a Toyota Corolla. However, I haven't looked at what they cost now, but they're like an affordable sedan that's very safe, that they do not break down, and they last forever.
Yeah.
And so for most people, the Toyota Corolla is what I could call best. Now, if you're Elon Musk or Joe Rogan and you have more money than God and you can drive anything you want, why have a Toyota Corolla? That's not best for you.
Yeah.
Get a Maserati, it's best for this thing, or get a Tesla, or, any number, a Lotus, get five cars that are best at their own little things. So I really want to be careful when I'm talking about other guns and our gun and all that. The reason that an AK is as overgassed as it is one, it's a machine gun, and 2, it's designed to run at negative 45 Fahrenheit or Celsius. They cross right there. Friggin' cold. And when you're really cold like that, the expansion of gases is dramatically lower. And so you'll get droopy performance. And I don't think our gun would cycle at negative 45. I know it'll cycle at 0. And so, if somebody's calling me from Alaska, I might drill their gas a little higher. If they actually want to be able to run in Fairbanks in December, it'll be negative 60.
Yeah.
Like, holy smokes. So
No, thank you, by the way.
Yeah, no thanks.
I'm good on that.
So for most of our folks, in most places, our gassing is is what we think is best. Some people, like Travis Haley, thinks our guns are slightly undergassed. He likes, like, we put a can on to give it a little more back pressure, and he's like, perfect. Because that guy is so fast that he needs that bolt carrier to be coming back into battery so that he can get his second shot off. And he can actually feel and detect when the bolt carrier speed is slower. Now, if I've got a 40-year-old mother of three who's 5 foot tall, she's gonna love that slower bolt carrier speed because it's not smashing her in the shoulder and beating the gun apart. So best really comes down to what you're doing. And so a little bit of a rant, but I think it's important because I don't think I'm better than RD or Meridian or, any of the Lee Armory, any of these really nice builders out there. It depends what you're looking for. We do something different.
It even goes back to the proverbial AR versus AK debate. What are you looking for out of your gun? So we've gone over most of the high points and even some of the really high points of what is going on in the 1775 rifle. But if someone is actually looking at getting into one, obviously with the way the industry is, we're filming this end of April 2021. The industry is still kind of crazy. What kind of lead time are people looking at right now?
Yeah, we ran into real problems with just having orders open because prices were rising on the parts we were getting so fast that we were selling guns at a loss by the time that we actually delivered them. So because of that, number one, we've had to raise prices because I'm paying more than double for most of my parts. I'm buying them retail. So right now in April 2021, they start at $3,000. Given that a Wasser or an Arsenal costs around $2,000 on the open market right now, I still feel like we're underpriced. I know, and $3,000 is a ridiculous amount of money. So I'm right there with you if your jaw's on the floor. So yeah, they cost real money. But the upside of that is that our lead times are sitting around 4 weeks. And so, yeah, you call us up. We've got orders open right now. But if we have parts, we build guns, and we keep the orders throttled way back. And so we have enough parts to make about 30 guns a month. And so we just turn the spigot on when we have openings. When we actually have the parts in hand, that's when we open orders up. And so if orders are open, you're looking at 4 weeks right now. Now, the way I have, with regard to pricing, if, we printed so much money last year that inflation is taking effect. Like 2x4s are like $10 a piece right now. So everything's more expensive. So things are really gonna just have to move with the market. However, if everything goes back to normal, our prices will go down. I just don't see when normal happens again, given the current administration.
Not anytime soon would be my guess. While we're talking about price, it's something I harp on a lot in my videos when I'm talking about AKs. People have this perception in the AK world, and I think it's because we were spoiled for so long with cheap AKs coming from legit military factories, that AKs shouldn't cost money because you can build them in a cave somewhere for $20. And, so why in the world would I, first of all, spend $1,400 on a Wasser or $2,000 on an Arsenal right now, or $3,000 on this? And I'll let you kind of touch on what you have to say about that. But, first of all, we have to understand that a lot of these comm block guns that were being imported were built in factories that were 100% state funded. So it wasn't a private entity having to go out, hire all these people, build all these machines. It was literally effectively slave labor that is manning these factories. And, the Soviet government slapped down 2 billion rubles or whatever it is to set up each factory. So if they were operating at, breaking even point, not a huge deal. If they're operating at a loss, not a huge, in the long term, a huge deal. But it wasn't a private entity setting up a company that has to be profitable to continue existing. And that's what we're running into here in the U.S. is it's not, the U.S. government isn't coming to you and saying, here's a bunch of money, build AKs for the community. It's probably the exact opposite. So it's private entities having to literally put all this capital forward to build an infrastructure from scratch to build AKs. And so that costs money. American labor costs money. And especially what is going on here. It's not, you can't just hire someone off the street and get them machining to the levels of precision that you have, or doing Cerakote or anything like that. It's skilled labor that goes into building these. So can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. No, I would second what you mentioned about slave labor. You know, all those surplus kits. We shouldn't feel bad about it, but we're cutting up the bones of failed communist states, right? And so those parts are, you can think of it like just being at an auction, at an estate sale or something, a garage sale. And that supply of stuff that was made, 30, 40 years ago is drying up. That's one thing driving it. And Hillary Clinton's State Department was buying up kind of the world supply during the Obama years. They were taking 200,000 guns a year from former comblock companies, and then Salt Bay sprinkling them around the Middle East to, I don't know to do what, but whatever, arming freedom fighters, which always seem to turn into ISIS.
Weird.
So that supply is really dwindling or gone. In COVID, the Eastern Bloc countries are legitimately being hit really hard by it. I don't know the exact situation, but the destabilization there has been much worse than here. Like Belarus, for example, has been under dictatorial martial law for a year and a half now or something. And it's regular to have people be snatched off the street. We actually have business associates whose friends and relatives have been disappeared in Belarus. And so the situation in the Eastern Bloc is really bad. And so parts, if they're coming out at all, are just decreased in quantity, demands through the roof. So yeah, that's causing the parts spike there. But just as a general thing, we need to get used to the idea that the comblock stuff has dried up pretty much. Yeah. There's some Romanian stuff kicking around. There's some new manufactured Romanian, but by and large, it's greatly diminished. And then, yeah, in terms of manufacture, when we're building, or another AK company in the US, there's a huge amount of capital investment to doing all the fixturing to build a gun. And we have, 30 or 40 fixtures here that all cost real money to build. So yeah, there's big cost. There's also the labor cost, what you're describing. Yeah, I pay people in America a living wage, and we're a small shop where everybody's a skilled worker. So, for the folks that cannot afford one of our guns, Wassers are awesome. If our gun isn't in the cards for you, that's great. Get a Wasser, run the piss out of it. And, the way I put it is that if we're in America and you love the Second Amendment like I do, we're friends, and it doesn't matter if you buy our gear or not. That's just how I feel about that. So yeah, for the folks that want something that is, that people have taken exceptional amounts of care with, that's well thought out, that's made in America, we love your business. But yeah, it goes back to that discussion of best, and just if those fit your values, and you want to support other Americans and grow jobs. Actually, that's another sort of tangential route. I get furious when I hear about, these Democrats talking about how that small business owners are no better than big corporations, and that the government creates jobs and that unions built America. Yeah, it just makes me want to say a whole big string of bad words. You, the customer, you guys who have bought our guns, you've created jobs. You've created about 6 jobs, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's real, and it matters. And in a small town like Moscow, Idaho, where there are not that many knowledge worker jobs around, it makes a big deal to this community. And so when you buy a t-shirt from us or a gun, you are helping build jobs in America, and for that I'm truly grateful. And if you're buying from Rifle Dynamics or Meridian, you're doing the same thing, and it's awesome. So to all you guys who are buying American, it matters. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Now, and on that note, like you said, there's not just, you don't have to just buy a 1775 rifle to be able to get some of the, at least additional accessories that make this special. You sell most of these components by themselves. You sell the stocks by themselves.
Yep.
The rear trunnion that has the pick rail integrated into it, the Merc handguard. So if you wanted to theoretically retrofit a rifle, or if you're building a kit yourself and you wanted to integrate some of these, it is definitely doable. And I would probably say it's easier to build from the ground up with this stuff than it is to just clamp it on afterward, because so much of it is integral. You know, the rear trunnion is riveted in. So you're going to have to be cutting rivets and replacing stuff if you want to do that. The Merc handguard, you know, is integral to the gun, or at least the clamp or the parts that it attaches to are integral to it. But you get a lot of really cool features. Again, a lightweight stock with multiple points of attachment. With that pick rail, you don't even have to use this if you didn't want to. Like, there's a bunch of options.
Yeah, totally.
And then, you know, even just like the Merc handguard, free floating is great. We all understand that and recognize that. But the fact that it cantilevers over the receiver, I'm a big fan of rear mounted optics. Part of that is it moves the weight center of gravity further back, keeps all the weight or some of the weight off the front. But then also there are certain optics where you need a shorter eye relief in order for them to work appropriately. And I've run side mounted optics. However, I have had issues where if a gun hits the ground too hard, it can bend those mounts. Now I can't even zero it anymore. I can get that rear mounted option without having to go to like a railed dust cover, which will lose zero potentially very quickly. Or again, some of those side mounted options where then I can't even have a folding stock anymore. So you're getting a lot of beneficial attributes by incorporating these. So if you don't want to spend $3,000 on a complete gun, you can at least get some of those parts and again, help support this American company and real actual people.
Yeah.
So if people did want to look into getting some of these parts or getting a complete gun, what is a good resource for that?
So OccamDefense.com has our web store and is the place to start your order. Our orders finish with, my wife does all of our customer service and invoicing and all that. So after you've entered your information, she reaches out to you, make sure that the build is correct, and then when the gun is close to being completed, we get payment and then, ship it out the door. And so for accessories, it's a straight web order. For ordering guns, it's a little bit mixed and there's some personal interaction there. When it's a custom gun, you get a phone meeting with me. We go through the configuration, answer any questions you got, and that's kind of the red carpet service. But there's still some personal interaction. And in terms of answering questions, the best way to do that is to email admin, like administrator, at OccamDefense.com. And I batch questions and answer them probably every 3 days or so. So if you have product-specific questions, or if you're wondering about will this fit on the gun, suppressor mounts, that sort of thing, we do our very best to provide an American level of service. I often tell people, especially in business, if you're not competing on quality and service in America, I have no idea what the hell you're doing.
Yeah.
Because those are the only things left. The Chinese have also, they're the things worth doing.
Yeah.
Like, we do this, for the love, that we love working with people, providing good people reliable arms that they can defend their families with, and to make something cool. Because if you're not going to make it, for me, if you're not going to make it as awesome as you can, why are you doing it? There's a whole bunch of medium range options out there. So it's been fun to swing for the fences and to have a bunch of you guys come along for the ride and support it. It's a big deal. So very lucky to get to do what I do. Yeah.
And they also have a good YouTube channel where if you're looking at, adding a Merc handguard, for example, you have videos showing how to install all that. And you're also pretty active on Instagram as well. So I'll have all the links to that stuff down below. And we didn't address it, but I'm sure you've probably already commented at this point asking about it. You don't just do rifles, you do pistols as well. Currently just 7.62, nothing 5.45 currently.
We've done a couple 5.45s, but a 5.45 kit right now is $1,800.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
So, if you just add that on to, we'd be into $4,000 or $5,000 at this point to make a 5.45 gun. So if you got to have one and you don't mind supplying the kit and you bought it 10 years ago, we can do it on a custom basis, but we're not really tooled up for 5.45. Believe it or not, they look really similar, but there's a bunch of important distinctions in how the gun is actually put together. that make 545 a little tricky. The minute I can get a reliable supply of 545 kits, all about coming out with a 545 gun. But we're just not there yet with the way that we like to build, which is on new parts.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, we've gone over a lot in this video. If you have any other questions, the email link will be down below as well. Again, check out their YouTube channel. A lot of questions are going to be answered there, I'm sure. And again, Instagram, anywhere else. There's a lot of information out there. And I really think that Occam Defense is a company worth paying attention to because, you know, this is where we're at now. Who knows what the future holds. And I can only imagine it's going to, you know, a lot of cool developments are still to come. So Brian, I really appreciate your time.
Likewise.
Yeah,
It's great
and,
for you guys to stop by.
Yeah, I'm really glad that we're able to make it here to Moscow and check these out and actually get the complete rifles in hand and be able to better appreciate again how the sausage is made. And it's some very, very good artisanal sausage. So again, check out all that stuff below. But as always, I hope you got something out of this video, and I really appreciate you watching.